My font didn't quite come through. My slides were a little bit fancier than this, but that's all right. Okay, about 6 months ago, I helped set up a build and release infrastructure team at Atlassian, and what we did was we audited our build and test infrastructure, and what we found were some interesting things that I wanted to share with you today. So I'll jump right into it. The first thing, if you're looking at your build and release infrastructure, is you want to sort of define your process. Chances are, if you're releasing any software, there's a process associated with that, and you want to know what that is. So you want to lay the groundwork first by looking at what your process is, taking it apart, naming all the bits, and diagramming it out. At Atlassian, we tend to think of our build and release process in terms of loops. So we talk about the inner loop, which is the code compile test loop that happens locally on the developer's workstation. And then there's the continuous integration loop that happens on commit. So when a developer commits to Subversion, that change then gets built and assembled and functionally tested with Bamboo. And the feedback goes back to the developers. And then there's some other loops that take even longer than that. There's the TPM loop, or the tested platform matrix, which is where the software gets built on a variety of platforms. And of course the release loop, where the release artifacts are actually built and deployed. So by laying this groundwork and defining the terminology that you're talking about your build process in, you sort of lay the groundwork for improvement. And you also have to measure your processes. So there's a saying that goes, you can't change what you aren't measuring, and the corollary of that is that even if you do succeed in making a change, if you're not measuring your build infrastructure, you won't be able to tell if you succeeded or not, or how much you succeeded. At Atlassian, we do that with a series of dashboards that collect the output of timing scripts that push their results into a database, and we display it in Confluence like this. So what we've done is we've taken some common developer activities like checking out trunk, or running a specific Maven command, or browsing in Subversion or in Fisheye, and we time them every hour, and we store the results in a database. And that way, if somebody comes to us and says, oh, hey, the build system seems a little bit slow, we can look at this and make an objective call about whether or not it is slow, whereas previously we were relying entirely on subjective experience. This is also great for when we make changes to it, we can see what the impact of those changes were in a very objective way. So we can set targets like, okay, we want to cut the CI loop down by 20%, and then we can objectively say whether we've succeeded or failed. And that's great. So once you're measuring it, and this touches on something that Corey was talking about before, you want to set up builds that we call canary builds or control builds. And these are builds that should always succeed. And why would you want to do that? Why would you want a build that always succeeds? Because if it fails, you know that the failure is not related to the code. It's related to the infrastructure. And that gives you a way to monitor the reliability and the speed of your build infrastructure in a really good way. And this is how we display that data. These are charts of control build success and failure. So every red stripe on that green bar there represents the failure of a control build. And we know that that's not related to code. We know that that's related to infrastructure. And this does a few things. First off, it gets the data, it gets the information about the reliability of the build infrastructure in front of the people that need to know about it. That is the infrastructure team. So when they see a red stripe on this, they know they've got to look into that build. Whereas previously, when a build failed, you didn't know if it was red because of a code change or if it was red because of an infrastructure failure. Now you know. The second thing that this does is even if your builds are flaky, even if your infrastructure is flaky and your builds are failing, at least you know about it and your developers know about it. So whereas previously it was a little bit of a black box to the developers, builds might be failing, they might think, oh, it's the infrastructure again. Now they know. So even if it is failing quite a bit, at least they know about it, and that's better than not knowing about it. Continuous integration and a lot of build strategies require a lot of compute power. And that usually means a lot of agents. Now, Corey, I think you had about 5 or 6 agents up on screen there. We've got dozens and dozens of agents, probably 50 plus. Now, that kind of compute power, you might be tempted, when you need to scale out like that, you might just be tempted to think, oh, it's a dollar question, right? You just buy more hardware, you get more agent capacity, and you run your builds on those agents. But that only really works if the cost of each agent is close to zero. The ongoing cost of each agent of owning that agent is close to zero. So you need to be able to scale out effectively. And there's another thing that you need to do, and that is you have to have your agents be perfectly reliably uniform. So you need to be able to enforce a consistent configuration across all of your agents. And there are two ways that we do that at Atlassian. We control configuration with a system called Puppet. That's an open source configuration management system that allows us to define a configuration for a class of agents. Like you might have Selenium agents, or you might have agents that are designed to test on a specific platform. You define that configuration in Puppet, and then you can propagate that configuration out to 2, 10, or 100 different agents with one simple change. And that's very easy to do with a configuration control system like Puppet. We use Openvz for kernel-based virtualization, which is a really low overhead virtualization platform. We use this to manage what we call our horde of robot agents. They're perfectly uniform. Their uniformity is ensured by Puppet. And the lightweight virtualization provided by Openvz allows us to do things like on an 8-core machine, so a dual proc 4-way machine, we can actually run 8 agents on that and get really, really good hardware utilization with KVM. That's kernel-based virtualization. Okay, besides scaling out, when you first start out with software, your developers usually set up your build strategy, and they own that, and that's great, and it works really well. When you grow a little bit, the build infrastructure tends to become the responsibility of other teams, like your systems administrator or your build team. And that can result in a disconnect between the people who are the architects of the build, the developers, and the people who are responsible for its infrastructure. So you really need to bridge that divide. You've got to bring these two groups together and make the build sort of a first-class part of the product. So you've got to inculate this feeling that the product is the build and the build is the product. At Atlassian, we do that by making the build engineers part of the development teams. So we have embedded people who are actually responsible for and own the builds within the dev teams themselves. Now, they interface with the sysadmins, with the people that run the infrastructure, but the build, we try our best to make that part of the product. And what that means that when there's a build failure, it's clear who owns it. When there's an infrastructure failure, it's clear who owns that as well. And that leads on to the next subject, which is just get people talking. When you become a little bit larger, it's easy for people to break off into groups and say, oh, I don't know what they're doing over there. They're responsible for that. But you need to get people involved in your build because it touches on so many aspects of your company. You need to get people together and talking about it. As software developers, we like to solve problems with code and with arguments about code on the internet. But that's not a great way to resolve strategic decisions about where the organization's build infrastructure should go. So what we've done is we've created this build coven, or a forum for people from around the company who are responsible for their products builds, and they meet every other week to talk about things like what the current issues are, what opportunities we have with new technology, and which way we want to take the build system. So we're addressing questions like, how is the build going to work with the DVCS? All these future options that we have. That's pretty quick. These are just a few of the things. This is a very wide topic. You can talk about it at length. There are a lot of things that you can say about software build and release, but these are a few of the things that we found, and I hope you guys find them helpful. That's it.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Any questions for Jim on Atlassian's build infrastructure? Yep.
So I assume you're using Bamboo for CI?
Yeah, very intensively.
Do you actually integrate release or automated functional or unit testing into the build process? And what about, after the build happens, getting it out to test environments and eventually production environments? Is that managed through this whole process in your team?
Yeah, we have a lot of different build processes. I mean, we have 7 major products, and so they each have their own slightly different ways of doing it. But the short answer is yes, we do test the release artifacts to release artifacts after they're assembled, but it depends on the product.
Can we try it?
Yep.
Can we try presenting this just so I can see it?
It runs a known good build of the software. So we create a tag, and we have Bamboo check out that tag and run it, and we know that there are no test failures in that tag. The development teams, I believe. Which installer?
Like if you use install anywhere, install Shield, that sort of thing.
Okay.
You said for that.
The product teams.
It's already set for presenter notes. But I don't think it was.
Yep.
I think you've got me. Let's just go with this. Are you okay? Yeah, it's fine. Okay.
That's okay. Okay, thanks. I'll be around for the rest of the day if anybody has questions.